So it's my great honor to be here, and I'm very thankful for the invitation to come here and share with you some of my research-based insights on the topic of farmer-centered on-farm experimentation. I'm a sociologist by training, so representing the social science dimension of this whole issue, and I have an additional background in science and technology studies. So this is sort of my background coming to this topic. And I'm representing here the Social Research Institute Baltic Studies Center, which is located in Riga in Latvia. And we specialize mostly in topics related to agricultural knowledge and innovation, food systems, and sustainable development. Today, I will base my reflections mostly on two recent projects that had a specific focus on on-farm demonstrations. And the first one is the EU Horizon 2020 project Applied, which was already, I noticed on Lauren's slide, and which was concluded 2 years ago, but I'm happy to inform you that the special issue of agricultural education and extension has been out now, so a lot of insights now published, so please feel free to consult it if you're interested in more about that. And the other project is a national project GreenHort, which was just launched this year, and where I take part as a sociologist along with horticultural scientists, and where are actual field trials being carried out in horticultural sector on selected agroecological practices on a research side, but also on 2 commercial farms. So I'm sort of both acting as a participant observation, making participant observation also alongside other issues there to see how the interactions actually are going on. So that's my idea of how I wanted to enter this topic of today. Okay, and so in regard to Applied, I will mostly build on a case study we did in Latvia in the livestock sector. So these are sort of two sectoral legs I'm standing here now. So before I dive into the actual observations made in the empirical research, I wanted to briefly outline the lens that I chose to address this topic today. As I noted before in the coffee break, I might have made a different presentation after having heard the previous ones, so it's an ongoing learning experience for myself as well, but a lot of things were echoed in the other interventions, so I hope I will build on those in my contribution. So when I was invited, I thought I'd look at the on-farm demonstration mostly from the perspective of farmer participatory agricultural research and extension, and with a focus on research-based on-farm trials and demonstrations that mostly take place in the studies that the case studies that I studied was as collaborative arrangements between scientists or advisors and farmers. And I largely see this as a part of a broader trend in promoting the so-called third mission of universities. I think this was a concept that hasn't been brought up in this debate, but it was my first automatic concept that came to my mind, and this the idea of the third mission of universities is that along the primary traditional missions of education and research, universities strive to address problems of societal relevance and promote public engagement in and with science, so to speak. And by that, I also see that this form of research and extension is containing also certain elements of citizen science, again, as already mentioned by Lawrence, where I see that the non-academic actors are being involved either in actively setting the research agenda or taking an active role in the very research process, not only as subjects of our research, but as, not only as objects of our research, but as subjects in the research process. And of course, these trends are frequently seen as part of the broader paradigm shift that I don't have to tell you, you're well aware of. So I'll skip the last part. Having said that, I believe that along these laudable trends, basically, which are very nice and look very good, I think it's equally important to critically look at these multi-actor processes of knowledge co-production and actually identify the existing areas of contention, not to over-romanticize these collaborative arrangements. And what we have learned from our study of the trial-based demonstrations in the livestock sector was that we could speak of three broad areas of contention along the processes of both agenda setting, but also the very process of knowledge co-production and communication of the knowledge that is being produced in those arrangements that bring together farmers, advisors, and scientists. And what we observed from the interviews and participant observation is that there are, of course, multiple tensions between the perspectives and the practices of stakeholders along these different stages of the on-farm trial and the demonstration process, which inevitably leads to a series of trades-off between what was initially the initial idea and the initial conceptions and the practical implementation of those. And what we and what we observed was that these main challenges relate to balancing expert and user-driven processes, negotiating claims for scientific knowledge, and integrating knowledge transfer and peer-to-peer learning, which, as we know, is crucial in adoption of innovations and scaling up. And what I'd like to focus today in the rest of my following brief contribution is this implementation phase of the on-farm trial, which I based on selected insights from the two above-mentioned studies. I'd like to start with my recent observation in the horticultural study of transferring the theoretical trial scheme drafted by researchers to the field on the farm. And these observations are maybe not that much about possible conflicts between the involved parties, but rather about the various considerations that come into play or need to be attended to due to the implementation of the trial on commercial farms. What I observed is that there's a whole array of practical farm-related considerations that can and do affect the spatial and temporal layout of the trial. For instance, the nice and neat scheme of rows and variants across the visualized trial plot needs to be flexibly adapted to the actual configuration of the farm, as the plot can be scattered and located in different shapes and sizes across the farmland. Likewise, there are considerable limits placed on the selection of trial plots based on the land tenure, as the one not owned rented by farmer cannot be securely used for long-term trials, and this is something that we need to account for. Another very tangible factor potentially requiring adaptations to the initial trial plot configuration are the physical parameters of the machinery used on the farm that determine the space between the rows, the row orientation, etc. So very tangible things that come into play and were not anticipated beforehand. An important factor that needs to be accounted for is that aside from or in addition to the scientific considerations, there must be room for economic ones, for instance, allowing the farmer to adapt the sowing time or the sown variety so that some economic benefit can be achieved as well. Last but not least, this is also a question of trying to arrange the trial in a way that does not cause too severe financial losses to the farm, and this is something also already taken up in the morning's discussion, because, for instance, due to non-compliance of certain areas of land for eligibility for direct area payments because of the things that are being trialed on these areas, it can be a hampering factor, because this is really highly likely in case of innovative approaches not stipulated by effective legislation in case of those more innovative arrangements that are being trialed there. So a major set of challenges related to the implementation of the trial has to do with the aspiration of ensuring the full adherence to the scientific principles, which is one of the key challenges also mentioned beforehand, that this is a challenge for research-led sort of on-farm trials. And the overall challenge lies in aligning the scientific rigor with the real farming conditions. And what I found was that given the relatively small but specified size of the trial plots, it might be difficult or even impossible, for instance, to fit these so-called objects of study into the area allocated for the trial due to the unpredictable nature of the plant as it grows. For example, a pumpkin, how can you tell in which direction it will go and how far? Or the aroma, for instance, of a lavender that it generates far beyond the physical borders of the plot. So these are challenges that are being faced by researchers in those small trial plots. It can also be problematic to define what is the so-called standard practice or the grower standard used on the farm to serve as a control for the trial. As a single farm can accommodate different farming practices in different plots and for different crops. And the terms of scientifically sound trial also stipulate specific requirements for the input supplies that can be used on the farm during the trial, and this can discard some of the resources readily available on the farm, such as self-harvested seeds or self-made compost, which sort of demotivates a bit the farmers involved in the trial. Yet this is seen as necessary for ensuring at least some comparability, especially in case of multi-site trials where, as we already heard, they can differ notably based on their location, soil properties, topography, etc., but of course also on the farmer, as we heard. And last but not least, the practice shows that the devil can be in the details, as many factors that can undermine the whole trial are not brought to the attention of the farmer due to the perception that this is sort of a basic or given knowledge on the side of on the part of the scientists. And for instance, farmer might not realize that adding some additional fertilizer on the trial plot can substantially change the outcome and the validity of the results. Both of our studies show that there are also certain tensions in the conceptual and practical distinction between what is a trial, what is a demonstration, what is an experiment, with the chosen concept sometimes tailored to the terms of the funding scheme rather than to the actual content of what it is. In public-funded schemes, experimentation is usually not encouraged, since there is a need to showcase good practices, and thus there is little room for failure, which is also a challenge the researchers also face in their realities. And the uncertainties over the epistemological basis of knowledge produced during the trials thereby illustrate the blurred boundaries between universal and situated knowledge claims and the messy practice and policy realities of taking science out of the laboratory settings. The study of the livestock trials also revealed the reality of frequent deviations from the formal procedures in the initial plan due to various both human and natural factors, which can at times even undermine some well-founded conclusions, as can be the case if, for instance, if not all livestock units that were there as part of the control group are there for the whole duration of the trial due to illness or any other intervening factors. It was also observed that the very process of the trial can also be hampered by the lack of commitment and diligence, as seen by the researchers of the host farmer, who can turn out to be no longer motivated either due to difficulties in following the protocol or due to the side problems, for instance, identified by an advisor on the farm that are not related to the trial topic, but there is a risk that these things might come up also in the public demonstration. So there are also those factors that intervene But at the same time, it was observed that the workload actually put on farmers during the trials can be too excessive and can turn out to be unexpectedly high, and even also have some adverse health effects due to the high stress and responsibility placed on the farmer, which needs to be taken account of when we expect farmers to engage in this type of activities. And as sort of a farmers might also feel quite left alone with the daily implementation of the trial procedures because the advisor or the scientist is not by the side all the time. So and this lack of clear and strict guidelines and the resulting non-availability of data due to this lack of guidelines can potentially force to rely only on some speculative calculations, and thus reducing the rigidness of trial results. So, having said that, I mean, even if there are those difficulties and challenges in these collaborative arrangements, I would still like to note that this by no means that such on-farm trials by default are flawed or useless. It's rather that we need to be aware of these potential pitfalls and learn from those to get the utmost value of this type of collaborations. And there are, of course, still many benefits that compensate for these hardships when considering the social and technological potential of on-farm experiments and demonstrations to promote innovative farming practices. For instance, these trials allow for testing new solutions in live settings of commercial farms, embedding those in the overall farm management. They also, in a way, force scientists and advisors to take account of the economic considerations, which are sometimes lagging when you just approach it from a scientific point of view. In terms of cost and benefit analysis of the proposed solutions, as these have an important, though of course not exclusive, role in wider adoption of those solutions and practices. And such on-farm trials also allow for timely identification of the possible bottlenecks in the application of those solutions that can be corrected for in the guidelines to be followed after the trial.
And we're going to have to wrap up very soon.
Yeah, then turning to the digital turn, because I think this might be a question that you might have had in your mind, what's digital about those, but I think those challenges are relevant irrespective of the tools used, but just the digital tools add an extra layer of both challenges and possibilities to the on-farm trials and demonstrations. And I think there's much room for those in the demonstration phase of those trial results. And just a few examples that we were exploring in the applied project, using virtual demonstrations through farmer-made videos, which is an effective way for peer-to-peer learning and sharing knowledge at a distance, but also the development of virtual farm, which is an application of a platform for a virtual visit of a farm, but I won't go into deep into that. And just as a final note, I thought that I might take this opportunity to invite you to an e-workshop to be organized from another project, AgriLink, that I came here just from the consortium meeting in Paris. And it's on digital delivery of advice to farmers. And I thought that it nicely goes together with the topics raised in this presentation. So in case you're interested, let me know, and I'll add you to the list of invitees. So sorry for taking so long. Thank you.
Thank you, Enda.